Bienvenidos de nuevo detrás de la noticia.
Welcome to Behind the News on RT. I'm Eva Golinger. Today we have a very special program. We're at the Ecuadorian Embassy in London, and with us is founder and publisher of Wikileaks, Julian Assange. Thank you so much, Mr. Assange, for being with us today on RT.
You're welcome.
Well, issues such as cyber warfare, espionage, surveillance, you've analyzed and written extensively about. Your organization, Wikileaks, has exposed the way the United States and its allies use these mechanisms to advance their power and influence in the world. And the recent documents and revelations made public by Edward Snowden, the former National Security Agency analyst, have caused a furious reaction throughout Latin America. The documents particularly pointing to mass surveillance and data collection of different Latin American nations, but especially Latin American leaders, heads of states in Brazil and Mexico, Ecuador, governments in Venezuela, and strategic interests. How have you viewed these revelations by Snowden and the impact that they've had in Latin America and the reaction from these Latin American governments?
98% of Latin American telecommunications to the rest of the world, that means SMS, phone, email, etc., passes through the United States. That's a function of the geography of the Americas, and as a result, the United States has what its intelligence agencies call a home field advantage, where they can easily intercept these communications that are passing through them, index them, store aspects of them forever, and therefore gain understanding of how Latin America is behaving, where it's moving, what its economic transfers, the activities of its leaders and major players. That permits the United States to predict in some ways the behavior of Latin American leaders and interests, and it also permits them to blackmail nearly every significant person in Latin America is blackmailable by the United States, because the US has access to those telecommunications records that have passed the United States, as well as other records it has obtained within Latin America by planting fiber optic taps, surveillance equipment at embassies and DEA bases. Even one of those revealed in Ecuador as a result of Edward Snowden's leaks. So you have a situation where the United States has mapped out the entire community structure, the relationships between every individual who has any chance of having any influence in Latin America, and is able to shift and play off different parties against one another. Now, you might go, well, if you say that is true, then why did Maduro win the Venezuelan election? Why did President Correa win with a significant majority the Ecuadorian election, given the US attitude towards those two states? Well, it's not a function of the US not having enough intelligence data about Latin America. It's a function of the United States taking its eye for around a 10-year period off Latin America and putting its eye on the Middle East and to a degree onto Asia as well. And during that period, a number of Latin American states have developed an increased independence from the US and its activities. And now, unfortunately, the United States is turning its interests back to Latin America. But unlike 10 years ago, it has a worldwide mass surveillance apparatus that affects nearly every single person.
Well, the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, recently in her speech before the UN General Assembly had very harsh, strong words for the United States mass espionage program, and particularly for President Barack Obama. who was there in her presence when she gave the speech. And she not only denounced and condemned that espionage is a violation of sovereignty, but she also called for the creation of an independent internet and communications platform within Latin American nations or even internationally that's not subject to U.S. control. Countries like Venezuela have developed fiber optic cables with the Caribbean, with Cuba, exclusively amongst themselves, have also launched satellites, communication satellites into space to ensure their own communication sovereignty. Is this the solution to protecting them against this type of U.S. invasion and violation through technological sovereignty?
Well, look, just like there is no meaningful sovereignty without control of freedom of movement, no meaningful sovereignty without economic sovereignty, there was no meaningful sovereignty without control of your own communications. It's freedom of movement, freedom of communication, and freedom of economic interaction that defines a state. Now, the United States has been aggressively trying to interdict economic exchange through interception and control of SWIFT and Visa, MasterCard, payments going through Latin America via the Bank of America. But it's also going in to Latin American major computer systems that operate important segments of government and the media and Petrobras in Brazil and other major economic interests, and interfering with the sovereignty of communications. That's what it's about. You know, when is a person or organization part of one state or another? Well, it's part of a state if that state can control its movements, its economic interchange, or its telecommunications interchange. And the United States is grabbing hold of economic interaction and telecommunications interaction. And so what's left is some degree of control of the physical force in a state. But even that has been eroded. When we look at what happened in the Edward Snowden case, where the US sprayed out extradition requests, Neil McBride, the same national security prosecutor who's prosecuting me behind that, sprayed out extradition requests for Edward Snowden to Venezuela, to Bolivia, to Hong Kong, to Iceland, to Ireland. That was about trying to take advantage of treaty arrangements which force the police and judicial systems of other countries to obey the interests of the United States government. So by subordinating subordinating regulatory or policing systems in treaty arrangements to another government, that third component, to control the use of force, is also given away. And in sort of the academic theory about what is happening there, we call this lawfare, which is using international treaty arrangements and multilateral organizations to get the territorial gains that you would normally get by war instead by law. So when you couple that activity to telecommunications interception and economic interception, then in fact you control the state without invading it. And that's what leaders and policymakers must be aware of in Latin America, that there is no effective sovereignty without sovereignty in the most important parts, economic interaction, telecommunications, and control of police and judicial instruments.
But is it possible, knowing also what you know about the U.S. capacity in terms of its technology and its massive reach through surveillance, that in Latin America they can develop sovereign technology that's free from U.S. control?
So, well, this idea that Dilma proposed of perhaps setting up an international regulatory commission for the internet. Well, there are some. The US is terrified of the ITU, International Telecommunications Union, taking over regulation of key aspects of the internet. ITU is European dominated, has been for many years. I don't believe that the internet should be dominated by any one region, and to a degree it should not be dominated by governments. I mean, the great liberty of communications for individuals and trade for businesses has come about because of a lack of control by states. When see some of the proposals by Dilma being put forward are not a mechanism to give Brazilians greater freedom from interception. Rather, they are a mechanism to give the Brazilian government equal access to that intercepted information. So we must be quite careful. There's a natural tendency by states, of course, to want to increase their own power. And they're more interested in increasing their domestic power really than they are typically concerned by the United States increasing its power.
Ahora, usted ha escrito y criticado bastante a Google.
I want to talk about Google because you've criticized Google extensively and also referred to it as an extension of U.S. foreign policy and power. Those are strong statements to make about a service that's used around the world. And for example, in many Latin American countries, even the highest levels of government have Gmail accounts. So can you elaborate a little bit on why you perceive Google as such a danger to our society and what are the alternatives?
Look, I wrote about this here in my book Cypherpunks and some recent articles reviewing the chairman of Google's book, the Digital Age. In that book, it's very clear what is happening. Google is presenting itself to Washington as a geopolitical visionary who can show the United States the way forward in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe, and so on. And that's quite a reactionary piece of work, with back cover praise chosen pre-publication by Henry Kissinger, Madeleine Albright, Tony Blair, Bill Hayden, the former head of the National Security Agency and NSA. The primary acknowledgement is to Henry Kissinger. So where's that coming from? Well, that's coming from a Google that started out in California, part of grad student culture in Stanford University. A pretty nice, naive, wanting to build services that the world would use. But as Google got big, it got close to government. As it tried to enter into foreign markets, it became reliant on the State Department to the degree where the head of Google Ideas is now immediately former advisor of Hillary Clinton and Rice from the State Department. This close nexus and interaction between Google and the State Department is something that we've documented on Wikileaks, in our Stratfor releases. It's also in the cables meeting between key State Department advisors and aspects of Google. So it wasn't much of a surprise when we learnt that as far back as 2009, Google had palled up with the National Security Agency to enter into the PRISM program. So we can see that Google is now part of Family America. It spends more money now on lobbying in Washington than Lockheed Martin. In the Google book, it even states that what Lockheed Martin was to the 20th century, high-tech companies will be to the 21st. It's a really quite strong form of neo-imperialism. And I don't want to use that phrase as some sort of hackneyed Marxist expression, but that's what it's about, jacking in the entire world into the US economic and informational system.
Y ahora vamos a hablar un poco sobre Wikileaks.
Now, your organization, Wikileaks, has published hundreds of thousands of documents, many of them from the US government, classified documents, and you've come under heavy fire. The organization has come under attack, yet you continue to publish documents. Is that going to go on? How is Wikileaks functioning, and are the attacks also continuing?
The attacks are continuing. Let's go back to 2010. Pentagon gave a 40-minute public press conference during that press conference, made a demand to us, the organisation, to me personally, we must destroy everything that we had published in relation to the US government, destroy everything we were going to publish, and cease dealing with US military whistleblowers, or else we would be compelled to do so. As a result, we said no, we weren't going to do that. We're a publisher. We make promise to our sources and the public to publish fearlessly and frankly. The US government then engaged in a 3-year-long war against Wikileaks, which continues to this day. Started up a whole of government investigation involving over 12 different agencies of the United States, including the CIA, publicly declared. The grand jury into Wikileaks and that investigation, the Department of Justice admits, as recently as August 23, continues. So the position that we are in is that an important alleged source of Wikileaks, Private Manning, has been sentenced to 35 years. A tactical victory, believe it or not, for his defense team, because the US government was demanding life imprisonment without parole. And probably as a result of our intervention in the Edward Snowden matter, the sentiment in what we know for a fact that the sentiment in Washington against Wikileaks as a result of the Edward Snowden matter is increasingly adverse. But the organisation continues to publish, continues to fight in the courts. We've intervened in multiple times. In the Bradley Manning case, we've had a series of victorious court cases against the banking blockade. Interestingly, all court cases that Wikileaks has been involved in that have come to judgment, it has won. There's been significant victories in the European Parliament where we managed to push forward legislation which outlaws the sort of banking blockade that is against us, a blockade that's similar to the blockade that's happening against Cuba. Interestingly, in relation to these, relation to financial blockades and the freedom of economic interaction, that sovereign right for states to interact, or people within states to interact economically. The internet has meant that economic interaction and communication are now merged together. So when the United States wants to intercept and surveil the economic interactions between people and companies, it just intercepts the internet. And it gets both of these at the same time. Similarly, if it wants to block off the economic interaction by some bank, say in Iran, well, it can just block off telecommunications with that bank.
Also, you mentioned Private Manning's case, and in that case, now known as Chelsea Manning, she was accused of espionage for passing documents to a media organization, classified documents, but not to the so-called traditional enemy. So this treatment now of media organizations or journalists as an enemy, is that dangerous in terms of whistleblowers for one, but also the media outlets? And do you think that this forms part of what President Barack Obama referred to in his speech before the United Nations recently as the exceptionalism of the United States, this kind of persecution and treatment of media and whistleblowers as terrorists?
Well, look, whenever you see a president talk about exceptionalism, what he's trying to say is the rules of civil behavior doesn't apply to him, whether that's in invading another country or whether that's abuse of laws at home. In relation to Barack Obama's use of the Espionage Act against alleged journalistic sources and journalists, that's something new. So it's very important that people understand that this is not just a bit more of the same. It's a radical change. Barack Obama has prosecuted more people under the Espionage Act, more journalistic sources under the Espionage Act, than all previous presidents combined, going back to 1917. In fact, he's prosecuted double the number. So this is a deliberate, conscious decision by the White House to create a chilling effect using the Espionage Act as opposed to some other mechanism. In the case of Bradley Manning, there's no allegation, has never been an allegation that he has passed information on to another country, that he has sold information, that he was intending to harm the United States or its people in any manner whatsoever. So that's just a linguistic abuse to call speaking to the media espionage. Similarly, it's a linguistic abuse to say that Wikileaks as a publisher, when it publishes, is conducting espionage.
Ahora quiero hablar sobre su caso.
I want to talk about your case a little bit. We're here in the Ecuadorian Embassy in London, where you've been for over a year, close to a year and a half. And as of now, there's been no resolution to the situation. You've been given asylum by Ecuador, but you can't get to Ecuador because the British government would detain you if you step foot outside these doors. Recently, Foreign Minister of Ecuador, Ricardo Patiño, had affirmed the fact that they have been working aggressively with the British government to try to reach a solution, but they've been unsuccessful. And now they're considering taking the case before an international court, violations of sovereignty as well as the right to asylum, amongst other rights that have been violated. How do you see the resolution to this situation? Is there one?
Well, it's a political, diplomatic, legal mix. I think in the reasonably short time frame, year and a half, actually there are some good signs that there will be a resolution. That time is on my side in this situation, in part because as time goes by, more of the facts of the situation are coming out. We've been filing criminal cases in Sweden, in Germany, in relation to intelligence activity against the organization there. So I think the position of some of the players involved is becoming progressively more untenable as time goes by. And we have seen, for example, even the Conservative Lord Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, denounce the expenditure of the police outside this embassy, spying on me, and said that those monies, which now amount to more than $10 million, should be spent on frontline policing, what police are meant to do, not ringing this embassy.
Ahora ambos, su persona, además de Edward Snowden.
Both you and Edward Snowden have received asylum in Latin American nations, you in Ecuador, and he's been offered asylum in Venezuela and Bolivia and also Nicaragua. He's in Russia with temporary asylum, which your organization has helped him to get there and obtain. But how do you view the fact that it's been Latin American nations, traditionally known as less powerful and developing countries, who have had the courage to stand up to U.S. power and support both of you?
Well, it's extremely interesting, isn't it? We were involved in filling out asylum requests for Edward Snowden, formally and informally, to around 20 different nations. Some because we thought there was a decent chance, others because we wanted to show the public the refusal to generate some public debate and awareness about how the government was behaving. But you're right, in terms of those nations that stepped forward, it was Latin America and Russia. And not all of Latin America either, but Venezuela, Bolivia, and Ecuador showing a keen interest. What does that mean? These are not very powerful countries. Russia, we can understand that it has its own nuclear armaments. It's geographically fairly independent, whereas Latin America is not. So that's really, I think, an expression of Latin American democracy, where you have governments who feel the need to be responsible to their people, who feel the need to live up to the sort of values that they're preaching, or they will be held account by the population. And so I see that as a part of the democratic nature of Venezuela, Ecuador, And perhaps now even Brazil hasn't yet made an offer, but it's starting to respond in relation to the surveillance matter and protecting Glenn Greenwald. It's starting to respond to the public pressure there.
Also shifting global power and the growing sentiment of sovereignty and independence in Latin America. But I want to ask about...
Well, you can compare in an interesting way, say, Germany and Venezuela. So in Germany, privacy is a really big concern. It's probably, of all the medium-sized countries, privacy is the most of value in Germany because of what happened in the Second World War and some other cultural aspects. And in Germany, we had Angela Merkel up for election. So not only did these events about Edward Snowden's asylum and mass spying occur in the context of a country that's interested in privacy, they occurred in the context of a country that had a federal election. And with reporters like Laura Poitras based in Germany, working with the Spiegel, publishing about German documents. And yet the German government did not offer Edward Snowden asylum, did not seek to transport him or assist in any manner whatsoever. So I think there's an example where even if the population has the democratic desire, the population has the will, that the government doesn't properly reflect the will of the population. Whereas we can see in Ecuador and Venezuela that the government is more...
Bolivia as well.
And Bolivia, that the government is more responsive, at least in relation to sovereignty issues, to the demands of the population.
Ahora quiero hacer una última pregunta.
Unwilling to subordinate themselves to U.S. power. I can only get in one last question. I want to throw in a few things. One is the issue of the future of journalism. Is investigative journalism under extinction because of this treatment and persecution of journalists who are exposing U.S. abuses and those also of other powerful entities around the world and are therefore treated as terrorists or enemies? Snowden's possibilities in future, what awaits him, and in terms of whistleblowers, whistleblowers' treatment, would he come under severe persecution in the United States? And then I want to tie into all of that a question about the film, because it's coming out, a film about you, about WikiLeaks, made in Hollywood, the Fifth Estate. Is this another attempt? It's all part of the same thing in terms of trying to discredit and distort the work that you're doing, WikiLeaks is doing, Snowden is doing, anyone who's trying to expose these abuses.
Well, for Edward Snowden, he's now safe in Russia. He has asylum for a one-year period formally, but assuming he doesn't run anyone over in a car, I imagine that the Russians will be happy to extend that indefinitely. I'm more concerned in terms of present people at risk with our journalist Sarah Harrison, who was involved in getting Edward Snowden out of Hong Kong, spent 39 days with him in the Moscow airport, protecting him, filing asylum applications, and is still in Russia now. She's from the UK. As we know, the Guardian newspaper was raided, Glenn Greenwald's partner detained for 9 hours on the Counter-Terrorism Act here without charge, and a formal investigation, a formal terrorism investigation has started up in relation to all those people.
Well, the head of MI5 also just declared that Edward Snowden's documents have placed the national security in danger.
Just absurd, but also there's a position by the UK which is clearly that they're going after anyone who's had something to do with this matter, probably in order to show to the US that that they feel their pain and they're part of the same club, possibly in relation to GCHQ. So that's a concern for us, what will happen to Sarah Harrison. But I think if we look at a bigger picture, okay, yes, there is some development in the United States and the UK, which is extremely serious. It's obvious to everyone. The rule of law is gradually starting to collapse. The mechanisms of government are lifting off from the population, from the judicial system. The judicial processes are becoming more and more secret. Here, introduction of secret courts, even the Labour Party here, Ed Miliband from the Labour Party, pushing legislation saying that soldiers should not be able to be criticised, adding them to hate speech legislation. This is a sort of proto-fascism. I mean, it's a strong thing to say, but I think that's the correct description. And the United States, yes, that is making people extremely timid. It has made, The Guardian's done some good work here, but it has made The Guardian also very timid in its publications. It has been holding a lot of stories back. It's been extensively redacting. It's been holding documents back. Same in the United States. From the point of view of Wikileaks as a publisher, of course, we think that's great, that we'll be the only player left in the field. From the point of view of Julian Assange as a free speech activist, I think that's an abomination and extremely concerning. On the other hand, just because you can smell the gunpowder in the air, you can smell the heat of the battle between those people who are revealing information about the crimes of state and war crimes and mass surveillance and so on, and those who are trying to suppress it. It doesn't tell you which side is winning. There's a serious conflict going on between a growing national security system in the West and those people who are trying to expose what that system is doing. That's for sure. Which one of these two groups is winning is not clear. We actually have some pretty important wins under our belt, as well as seeing many journalists surveilled and prosecuted.
Film?
Okay, so the film Fifth Estate is, well, actually you introduced it already.
Do you believe it's an attempt to discredit you and your organization?
I don't sort of look at things that way. This film comes from Hollywood. I know the books that it was based on. The books definitely were an attempt to do precisely that. DreamWorks has picked the two most discredited or libelous books out of the dozens or so books that were available for it to pick. But it's coming out of a particular milieu about within Hollywood, and that constrains, it seems, what scripts can be written and what things will get distribution. I don't know if that was the intent of the filmmakers. It's certainly the result. But, it's been doing quite poorly in the reviews. I think the information that we've published about it will be pretty successful in knocking out any view that is an accurate history. It's interesting to see that in the Americas, Disney, who's responsible for the distribution there, has been putting up posters of me with the word traitor emblazoned across my face. It's, a laughable concept because I'm an Australian. I couldn't even be a traitor in theory to the United States. I mean, it's a type of it's a type of libel. I think ultimately people are starting to become immune to those sorts of attacks. There's been so many as time has gone by, and people who've been watching the WikiLeaks saga have seen many of these attacks and then seen that they've come out not to be true. So I think our base is not going to be affected by the film.
Bueno, lamentablemente tenemos que dejarlo hasta ahí.
Very important work you've been doing, and it's opened a great debate around the world. Unfortunately, we have to leave it here, but thank you so much, Mr. Assange, for being with us today on RT.
You're welcome.